And welcome back, rugby fans, to Rugby411. As always, I'm your host. My name is Joshua Shibata. And let's talk about Storm Week. Storm Week! Hitting the Major League Rugby in 2025. Now, what exactly is Storm Week? So, first of all, the term Storm Week actually came from the NPC, the National Provincial Championship, which is the highest form of professional rugby in New Zealand at the club level. In their season, they were forced to deal with basically the same thing Major League Rugby is dealing with, forcing a condensed season in a certain amount of weeks. So for Major League Rugby, we're trying to condense 18 weeks of games into only 17 weeks. So we are losing a week. In order to do that, especially just because of travel and everything, there was a lot of creative booking, as we like to say. And you have now a bunch of games, more games than normal in a certain amount of weeks, which is why if you were paying attention to the social media at the beginning when they first announced the season, we were all questioning why were certain teams playing twice in 1 week, and this is the reason why. The reason is because if you've been following my rugby videos as well, this summer is the summer of rugby. And we are going to be having a huge summer rugby tour where the national men's team is going to be, and the women's team are going to be playing a bunch of games, test matches against other national teams here in the United States. Very important games, by the way. These games, which will, of course, help determine if the USA Eagles can qualify for the upcoming 2027 World Cup. So, because of that, it only makes sense to make sure that the players on the USA Eagles team, players that are spread out throughout Major League Rugby, playing for a bunch of different Major League Rugby teams, are available to play those games. If you remember last season, during the playoff run, a couple of test matches occurred with the USA national men's team, which forced those players to leave their Major League Rugby teams in order to participate in those games. Also, too, it just didn't give them a lot of time of preparation as well. And that cost USA some of those games. You're playing against teams on the national level that are training with each other for more than a couple weeks, and compared to the USA Eagles last year, where these players were just coming off of playing in the playoffs, now forced to play in these national games. So it doesn't make a lot of sense. On the national level in Europe, especially with the URC, the United Rugby Championship, with the Premiership, it is a common practice to have these teams do that. It kind of screwed things up quite a bit. I always felt that was very odd to watch. It's definitely not an American sports thing. It's very much a European rugby thing. And again, it's also something that the WER is dealing with right now. Women's Elite Rugby. I'll talk about that when I talk about my WER review. Right now, the members of the Women's USA Eagles team, those players who are on WER teams, and there's a couple of teams, in particular Deveronics and the Boston Banshees, that have a lot of Eagles players who will not be able to participate in the next couple of weeks of WR action because they have to participate in the upcoming women test matches and the upcoming Pacific Nations Cup. I know for a fact that all the Women's Eagles members are now in San Diego preparing for their upcoming match in 2 weeks' time against the women's Japanese team at the Wallace Annenberg Stadium, which will be part of a doubleheader with the RCLA playing against San Diego for the Cali Cup earlier in the day, the women's USA team taking on the women's Japanese team in the evening. So again, they can't play the WER games, so they miss out on those games. It kind of changes things because now you have teams that have a bunch of players that are normally starters not being able to play. Major League Rugby didn't want to have to deal with that. So, in order to avoid all that, they condensed the normal 18 weeks into 17 weeks. What does that do? Oh, it creates storm. Basically chaos. And I'm assuming that's where the Storm Week name came from the NPR. But I'll show you what I'm talking about. I'm bringing up the schedule. And this is the upcoming month this is the upcoming month and a week, so 5 weeks of Storm Week. Technically, there's an extra week 16 as well, and I'll talk about that in a bit. But let's start with week number 10 first. You have technically 4 days. Technically a span of Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, a span of 6 days. 2 additional days that normally there wouldn't be rugby, Tuesday and Wednesday, where there actually will be rugby games. Because of that, technically you have New England and you have Seattle and you have Anthem playing 2 games in 6 days. New England is playing 2 games within the span of 5 days. Normally playing 2 games in the span of 6 or 7 days. New England is losing a day in order to play 2 games. Now, some of you are thinking, what's the big deal of a day? A day makes a big difference, especially if you're also traveling. New England is played at Anthem first on Friday. They have to travel, and then they're going to be hosting RFCLA on Tuesday. Not a lot of time to prep and get over any injuries or any kind of physical beatings that you took in the prior game in preparation. What you normally have a week, you only have a couple of days. It is a big difference, and that's just a start. Going on to week 11, we have Saturday, Sunday, and then we have a Wednesday game with San Diego and Utah. Week 12 is the only week in this span that is a normal week per se. You have games on Friday and you have games on Sunday. But then we move on to week 13. And again, you have Friday, Saturday, Monday, and Tuesday. So a span of, again, 5 days where you have some teams. You have NOLA playing Friday, hosting to Miami. And then on Tuesday, in 4 days, they have to then play Old Glory. So they're playing 2 games in 4 days. Normally you're playing 2 games in 6 or 7. They are losing 2 to 3 days of prep. And again, it's not just them. Moving on to week 14, again, you have Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday games. You have, in this week span, you have NOLA that just played. You have Seattle that just played Monday. And then on Sunday, they're going to go against San Diego. So they're technically losing a day as well. Saturday, you have New England taking on Chicago. Friday, they're then going to have to travel over to Miami. So again, New England also having to play a bunch of games in a certain amount of days. Week 15 is where we have a little bit of a break where things are normal. And then week 16, you have this odd extra game on Wednesday between Houston and Chicago. So what does that all overall mean? I'm going to show you with the numbers here. Some teams are affected a lot more so than others. The teams that are on top of this list are affected a lot more than the teams on the bottom. And I'll kind of go into something that's kind of interesting about that. So, once again, let's pick a couple of the teams. You have Anthem. You have Seattle. They have to play 2 games in 6 days. They have to play 3 games in the span of 10 days. And then for Anthem, you have 4 games in 23 days. So that kind of averages out already. But Seattle has to play 4 games in 15 days and 5 games in 25 days. So again, let's break that down. Normally, you would be playing 5 games in possibly 30 days because 1 game every 6 days. Seattle has to play 5 games in 25 days. They lose 5 days of prep. They lose basically almost a week of prep. So they're forcing them 1 extra game in 1 less week of time. So again, that's asking a lot from certain teams. Moving on, you also see New England, RFCLA, 2 games in 5 days, 3 games in 12 days for New England, 3 games in 11 days for RFCLA, and then 4 games for New England in 18 days, 4 games for RFCLA in 19 days. Again, if you do normal math, the way that normally it is, you usually are playing 4 games in 24 to 28 days. New England is playing 4 games in 18 days, RFCLA 4 games in 19 days. I mean, again, you're losing almost another week in prep. It's asking a lot for some of these teams. Now, is that fair? I mean, that's the way sports is, right? What's interesting is that then you go to Old Glory, Houston, Chicago, NOLA, Miami, they're not affected nearly as much as other teams. While the teams that I mentioned, most of them in 4 games, they're usually playing 4 games in a span of either 23 to 15 days is for Seattle. 4 games in 15 days. Comparatively to those other teams, Old Glory, Houston, Chicago, NOLA, Miami, playing 4 games in the span of 20 to 24 days. So those teams technically get 5 extra days, or at least a normal schedule, technically. It's interesting the way that it worked out. I don't know if it worked out this way simply because the Western Conference has one less team than the Eastern Conference, so it's a little bit easier to manage having all the teams play. But with the exception of New England and Anthem, the teams that are all, and with the exception of Houston, the teams in the Western Conference are all affected by this, more so than the Eastern Conference. Only Anthem and New England are really affected. Seattle, San Diego, RFCLA, and Utah are all affected. So again, it's going to be interesting to see how this works out with Storm Week, how it really is going to force the coaching staff and the management staff to really figure out how are they going to prep for each of these games. Obviously, it's going to be asking a lot for their players to have all of them play every game with knowing that there's less prep, less time to recover from injuries. This is really where depth of your team is going to play in. Are you going to let more of your reserve start a couple of these games? Are you going to let your starters rest? Is it going to depend on who you're playing against in these games? So I feel in these next month and a half, you're going to see a lot of roster changing and a lot of roster management. And it's going to make it very interesting to see if possibly some teams, just like when we get to the end of the season, when a playoff position is already secured, are these teams resting players? Are you going to see some teams purposely resting players, possibly risking losing a game, knowing that in the long run they're still going to be safe for a playoff spot? You know, I mean, is Utah or San Diego going to rest more players than say a Seattle or RCLA because they're not fighting for a playoff spot as much as those other teams are? Is Anthem just not going to care and just do their best because the goal is just try to win? Our team's just going to let Anthem win because, I mean, you know, why not rest their team? Because, you know, Anthem is not winning games. It's going to be interesting to see how this affects Major League Rugby in this year. And also, too, it'll be interesting to see if this is the way things go from here on out. Because especially if next year we have another huge test season during the summer. I mean, granted, hopefully by that time we've already secured a spot in the Rugby World Cup. But maybe we're still fighting for it. And if we have to fight for it, we definitely got to make sure our team is ready to play. Will that come at the sacrifice of Major League Rugby and this storm and forcing the teams to really have to deal with extra games in a less amount of time? So it's really going to be interesting to see how this plays out in this season of Major League Rugby. And will it affect the playoff chances of some teams more so than it normally would have affected? So let me know what you think about that in the comments below. I hope that I explained things correctly and in ways that you understand. It's really fascinating when you think about it, and really is going to make it interesting to see how teams deal with this in the upcoming weeks of Storm Week. I'm sorry, I just love the little special effect there. But anyways, thank you very much for checking out my video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you on the pitch.